Welcome to our 13th episode of Africa Talks. My IJP colleague Eka and I, we welcome you for this edition. Africa Talks is designed as a digital platform for exchange of African and European topics, exchange of knowledge and ideas between journalists and experts from civil society from both continents. We want to learn, engage and discuss. I'm Marco Wormer. I'm a member of the board of the International Journalist Programs IJP, and I would like to introduce Eka, my colleague, to you.
Yes, my name is Eka Neumann, and I'm the coordinator of the African program of the International Journalism Program. And great to have you all here today.
Our topic for today, scarce housing and skyrocketing rents, disturbing developments in the housing sector. In many European metropolitan areas, there is an increasing shortage of affordable housing, despite falling population figures. In Germany, around about 1 million flats are missing. At the same time, African cities face a population increase of 40,000 people on a daily basis. Housing needs cannot be met in many cases. What are the reasons for these troubling developments, and what are the approaches for solving them? What can the big cities of both continents learn from each other?
So today's experts are, let me just get this right. So today's expert are Christian Putsch from the Africa-Correspondent of the WELT group, the Die Welt-Gruppe. So, and then we have Beatrice Mwangi, research manager at the Center for Affordable Housing Finance in Africa, and Mandu dos Santos Pinto, architect and urban planner. Mandu, Architecture and Urbanism.
Welcome all of you to our show. But before we start, we also would like to present to you our special guest, so to say, Wiebke Koch. She's a graphic recorder and will take graphical notes of this talk. Hi, Wiebke.
Hi, everyone. I'm looking forward to this discussion and to provide a visual harvest of the talk.
So that's great, Wiebke, that you are there. We will have a look later and see what we got, what you got. So, and I would like to introduce our first panelist, which is Beatrice Wangi. She's a research manager at the Center for Affordable Housing Finance in Africa. She has nearly 5 years of experience in the real estate sector, mainly in focusing on housing. She has an extensive knowledge and experience in research, especially data analysis, project financial analysis, and project management. And prior to being at the Center for Affordable Housing in Africa, she has worked with the Citon Investments, Superior Homes Kenya, and EAFAI. And she holds a bachelor degree in project planning and management from the University of Eldoret, Kenya, and completed a course on housing finance for sub-Saharan Africa at the University of Cape Town in 2021. She is passionate for betterment of humanity through decent housing for all. Beatrice, we are glad to have you. Please let us know your findings and your thoughts. And yes, the floor is yours.
Beatrice, you're muted. If you could unmute yourself. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you so much for having me, Eka, and the team. Thank you for that brief introduction. So from where I sit and from the experience that I have in the housing sector, the housing crisis is not an African problem. It's universal across the globe. We have so many countries that have issues with housing, and having looked at even the challenges, there tends to be a link between the challenges from one country to another. The main challenge mainly revolves around financing either on the developer side or on the demand side. And looking at all those countries that have a housing crisis, we have a very high rate of urbanization. If I was to speak for Kenya, for example, the urbanization rate stands at around 4% compared to the global rate of around 2%. So that seems quite high. And thus, the housing crisis continues, and we expect the rate not to go low anytime. The COVID pandemic as well has come to heighten or emphasize or magnify the crisis that we have. And many people are able to notice that their households that they have are not comfortable or cannot be contained in their current settlements or in their current housing units. And thus the need for ample housing in terms of size, in terms of getting amenities, you're comfortable, able to even, for example, at this point where we have the pandemic, then you're able to maintain your household members within the homestead and feel comfortable without being so compact or not having access to essential services, for example, water and electricity. Main challenge, as I'd mentioned previously, has been financing, both on the developer side and the demand side, where now consumers are not able to get affordable home loans, for example, to finance their housing. We also have a challenge with the high construction costs. And this has from time to time been tackled through adoption of technology. But even if you look at countries that have been having these innovative ways of adopting technology, then it has not been well embraced and thus has not been able to achieve its impact. I think from having looked at countries that have done better, looking at countries such as Singapore and the rest that have been able to rise from the housing crisis, I think what I would mention as the three most recommendable ways of handling the housing crisis is one, partnership. I think from an African perspective or from a business perspective, most of the time partnerships are seen as not a good way to work in business, and businesses want to work separately for competitive advantage. But I think in this case, partnership among all the players in the value chain is going to be really helpful if you're going to achieve affordable housing and at scale, which means that it serves the entire population that is in need of this housing. The other solution is going to be adoption of technology, and to facilitate fast adoption of this technology that's coming up and people have a hard time getting to adopt it, then we might need the government to also embrace these new methodologies of building, these new technologies, just to ensure that the community, the society is able to also embrace technology and able to then work towards achieving affordable housing at affordable rates and at scale. And finally, we need to appreciate the micro builders. If you look at the society we are in right now, it was to look at Africa and most of the countries, look at Kenya, look at Tanzania, Uganda, look at South Africa, for example. We have so many micro builders who are not able to do maybe 100 and above units, and they have been overlooked over the long run. And at this point, then we're not able to appreciate the much they do, and we're only focusing on maybe large-scale builders. So it's important that we also, the government and also other institutions, also focus on the micro builders, empower them that even if they're able to only build the 50 units, then cumulatively we are going to be able then to provide adequate housing in the long run. Thank you.
Thank you, Beatrice. We are going around in our round of panelists, and we are very happy to have Christian Putsch with us. He is the African correspondent with WELT Media Group, Germany, since 2009. And by the way, he is a fellow of the IJP Journalist Exchange Program, which he attended a couple of years ago. Let's put it this way. And I think I do not give away too much when I say that the IJP program supported your decision, Christian, to stay in South Africa and work as a foreign correspondent. What a career, I might say. And I'm really very glad that you could make it to be part of our show. Christian has traveled to 30 countries on the continent, focusing on political and humanitarian reporting. He has won journalism awards and recognitions for his coverage of the World Cup 2010 in South Africa, as well as for features on Boko Haram in Nigeria and the taxi industry in Cape Town. The issue of housing in Africa has been a recurring element of his work. Great to have you here, Christian. And what is your view on the housing situation in African countries and maybe especially in South Africa?
Yeah, thanks so much, Marco, for the quite flattering introduction. Yeah, it's true. It's been 15 years since I participated in the IJP program. Maybe I can just start with a brief comment on that. I think, for me, it indeed has been my start of my Africa journey, really. And many of the networks I started back then, they are still holding up until today, which is just lovely, including you and Eka, which is fantastic. But yeah, coming to today's topic, I mean, I feel a bit shy next to, like virtually standing next to Mandu and Beatrice, who are dealing with the topic on a daily basis. I mean, it is indeed a recurring, I want to say, theme of my work. Housing issues is a very political issue, especially here in South Africa, especially over the last couple of years since we've had the expropriation without compensation debate, which is largely driven by the demand for affordable housing next to the urban centers. And there's obviously a lack for that. There's a huge pressure on the big metropolitan centers such as Johannesburg, Durban, and Cape Town, and there's just not enough space. I mean, South Africa is one of the more organized countries in Africa, but it's increasing to become urbanized, and the pressure just doesn't stop. So are the costs of living. I mean, I had a look at the statistics. I mean, what you said, Beatrice, you're right. It's a global issue, the high cost of living in urban areas. But in Africa, the issue seems to be, actually quite amplified, because the cost of living in African cities compared to urban centers with, let's say, similar income situation, let's say in Asia or Latin America, they are 30% higher in Africa. So the theme is, or the issue is clearly more pressing in Africa. The World Bank also says that accommodation is even 55% more expensive in urban areas compared to comparable areas, which is obviously a disaster. And it is. If you follow the political landscape here, it is a recurring topic, not just in South Africa, also like in Kenya. If you look at the situation in slums such as Kibera, it's basically what fuels the anger at the political elite in many countries. If you don't have like a stable roof on top of your head, I mean, there is no stable democracy, as simple as that. And you see it over and over again in so many different countries. And it seems as if there's not enough investment compared to places such as India or China, for instance, in most African countries. And that's something that's very much overlooked. And that's also why I appreciate this debate, because I think there needs to be more emphasis on this topic.
Yeah, thank you, Christian. And thank you for being part of this panel, because I think you're right positioned here, so no need to be shy. I would like to introduce Mandu dos Santos Pinto to you, who's an architect and urban planner. He's been, for the last 20 years or nearly 20 years, Mandu has been seeking solutions and implementing solutions in the field of architecture and urbanism, in order to develop to look for innovative and sustainable solutions for the cities in the global south. So he developed projects and methodology, and his methodology is called Museke, in order to upgrade informal settlements without displacing the inhabitants. So he's also developed the first sustainable real estate fund, Green Property, in Switzerland. And he designed a project which is called Live with Water, Climate Resilience Project, to improve the living conditions of 1 million people in flooded neighborhoods of Dakar. And Mandu dos Santos Pinto has a master's from the Swiss Institute for Technology, Zurich, the ETH. Glad to have you here. Thank you for joining us. So the floor is yours. Please share your thoughts.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm very glad to be in this round. This topic is, from my professional, it's my main topic, so I think it's very important. And I think the first question actually I see on this topic is housing is a human right. So if we start by that, then actually all the rest comes along, because what does this mean? Is a human right, but there's speculation going on every day on housing, so that doesn't fit. So I think we heard from Beatrice the question about financing, also from Christian about financing, but the problem is also financing because they want to profit. So the structures are, the financing structures are the problem of the housing. That's what I see in my daily work. So coming to it, scarcity, for example, in Berlin, there was the city with the most affordable housing situation in Germany and in Europe. And they created scarcity of houses because it was not profitable enough to invest in houses. So that's the problem. Actually, is the financing structures, and we see the same in African countries. We have a very high average rate of growth, as Beatrice already said, and Christian also. The African cities are among the highest, among the highest growth rates in the world, but also they have the highest ratio of informal settlements. In African cities, share like in average have 60 to 80% informal settlements. That means 60 to 80% of a city have no access to infrastructure, to water, to public transport, to other public institutions. So just imagine for a second a Western or social city of the global north with 80% no infrastructure. It would not function. It would not function. It would break down. So why does it work in African cities? That's because informal market is providing a huge part of the public transport, of the housing, and exactly for the housing sector. If we look at the data even more in African cities, the economical structure is about 70 to 90% formal. So even more, and what Beatrice said it before, we're always overlooking the micro entrepreneurs, but the micro, so the single persons who build the houses. That's where I, in my work, also focus my focus. It's on the informal potential of those houses, of the African cities. So we develop sustainable solutions for African cities. That means we build with the people on the ground, so with the informal settlements, for example. And that means what? African cities, the informal market is able to build 1,000 houses in a city overnight. No other entity or private builder is able to do it and to provide the financing for that. So instead of avoiding those and informal markets, we should really embrace them and develop solutions together. More than that, African countries and African cities most are now also most challenged by climate change. So, and mostly also the informal settlements, what means that they don't only have scarcity of infrastructure, but also the climate changes problems. And we also managed to provide solutions for that. That's a project Live with Water, where, for example, in an area of 10,000 peoples, we provided infrastructures built with the populations. So we could drop down the costs immensely, but it's not only built with local and low technical possibilities, but that means also the ownership goes to the populations. So yes, there are possibilities. There are also possibilities for the European cities where it doesn't need to have those mainly high financing with big corporations build housing. I think there are other possibilities, as for example, sustainable cooperatives are doing it in many European countries also. So I'm very much looking forward to talk and discuss this topic with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mandu. And I would like to start the discussion by asking Beatrice, what would you say? What would be the key? What would be the key for a solution I'm always like, we're always trying to find out what needs to be changed and what would be the key of solution that the housing situation, especially in African countries, can improve.
Thank you. I think there's no silver bullet. There's no one thing that can change and we have a whole drastic change in the housing sector. I think it's the several things that needs to change. We have highlighted different problems, and even if one is solved and the rest are left, I don't think we'll get to where we want to be. There's so many aspects of housing. We have the financing part, we have the construction, we have the legal framework. So there's so many bits that needs to be put together for us to be able then to achieve efficient or effective or decent housing for all. Yeah, that will be my response for that.
But allow me one more question. When we take Mandu, who says it is a human right, housing is a human right, I wonder whether you think this is lived in African countries. I think there it is more a daily war for room, for space, and this is not. It's not a situation of human rights where people can count on that there will be housing for them and for their relatives. How would you argue, or what would you say to this argument from Mandu?
I agree with him 100%. It's a human right that even the government has a part to play. The players in this housing market have a part to play to provide this housing for all. It's unfortunate that to some people, it's a privilege to have a roof over their head. It's a right that needs to be met. And that's why there needs to be that collaborative work to ensure that everyone enjoys that right. I agree, it's a right for everyone. And it's not just housing, it's dignified housing. I think most of the time we just consider the roof over one's head as housing. But you look at people living in slums, they don't have even clean washrooms. They lose the dignity of just a normal human being. So for me, I think I agree with him 100%. It's a human right, and not just housing, it's dignified housing for all. Yeah.
Christian, I have a question. You did articles and you've been writing on housing. And especially in South Africa, I think, if I'm right. So could you tell us a little bit more on what you saw, what you found on ground? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure. Last week I was in Marikana. Many of you might remember it was the place which probably had the biggest tragedy in South Africa's democratic history. 2012, 34 mine workers were killed by the police. It's become a symbol for police failure in South Africa. And this place, almost 10 years later, had multiple promises, both by the private sector, by the mines, but also by politicians, to improve the living conditions, which were basically the basis for the strike back in 2012. And to see how people are still living there is absolutely shocking. I mean, by the account of people I spoke to, it's actually rather deteriorated rather than improved that side. And it is a very complex issue, because I mean, if you're here in Cape Town, and there is quite a substantial number of RDP houses, government houses, which have been provided by the government. Indeed, not enough by no means, but there are those houses. But if you don't have, first of all, title deeds, it's become really, really tricky. Many of these people are living there, but they still struggle years later to get the title deeds. So they're not the rightful owners of those houses. The second big issue is obviously you might have decent housing, but as Beatrice has said, I mean, that's not enough. You need decent living, and to have a decent living, you have to be able to self-sustain yourself and have a job. And South Africa, especially since the beginning, but not only since the beginning, but since the beginning of the pandemic, has record unemployment rates. So you might get one of these houses, but what happens quite often is that these people are renting out these houses because they don't have any other means of income. So what do? Do you want to live in a decent house, but then you don't have bread on your table? You obviously rent that house out. You get the equivalent of maybe 200 or 300 euros per month for that, but you move back into a shack. So that's obviously happening a lot, and also the government has put stricter regulations in place so that these houses can only get sold after 8 years. So that's also been a problem, that many of these houses get sold quickly, and people again move into very, very inappropriate accommodation. So if you don't have a job, then even like a proper 50, 60 square meter RDP house, like a government house, doesn't necessarily improve your life substantially. So I think, in my opinion, that's the biggest challenge. How do you improve the living conditions of these people, like wholesomely, you know, like how do you provide a basis for a life where, you actually can sustain that living standard and don't depend on the income of such a house? Because the moment you don't have that, then even housing is not enough to improve people's life.
Thank you, Christian. I would have a question to Mandu. Would you, did you make similar observations maybe in other countries about government housing, where there's like, where people receive houses from the government and then rent them out, or yes, it doesn't help the situation?
You are muted.
You're still muted.
Yes, I share this experience. I've seen it in South Africa also, but in other countries also. But I think the problem here is back providing. That's the problem. We don't provide houses. I think that's a European model which is outdated. If we see mainly in African cities where we have 60 to 80% self-built houses. So that's a huge market and a huge power. We cannot substitute this by building houses and providing them. So that's an initial problem. But because I've seen it in Angola, in every country, building sustainable houses is a big business. So, but the people who are living in these houses, they are not involved in any of these processes. They are not benefiting on these processes. They are in Rwanda, for example, there have been built 1 million houses by Chinese companies. And who is going inside in these houses are some people who have already houses, or then they can rent a house. In South Africa, it's more complex because the post-colonial structures, the post-apartheid structures still are now there. The infrastructure is so segregated, so that the questions about how to deal with this colonial past and the apartheid past, I think that will have changes, but mostly we have to participate. And that's the same question also in Europe. If people cannot participate in housing as a living right, in building houses as a living right, in Africa, they are on the front because they know how to do it themselves. But the problem is, as long as cities don't accept, or governments don't accept self-built houses as a model, then they neglect their power, and so people cannot build them right. They are not connected to infrastructure, which has to be provided or being built with the government and the cities, and that becomes a problem. And I don't agree that there is no solution for African cities. There is, because it's already running like that. So we should only empower, like we did in our projects. You can build infrastructures with the populations. People like in the city of Dakar, where 2 million people were in danger zones of floods because of climate change. They changed in 3 months the infrastructure with self-built infrastructure, and so being in secured houses there. So by night it changed from an endangered criminal zone to a zone where people like to walk around because it was nice. So I think there is possibility, and they are everywhere. We just shall embrace, and we shall challenge the system of financing and provide, but do participate, open it up for people, and their solutions will come. They are there.
Beatrice, from your perspective, would you agree to that, or have a different view? You are into, you have a background of finance. housing finances and working in the sector of affordable housing finance. Do you agree to what Mandu said? You're still muted, sorry.
Thank you. I agree with him, especially on incremental housing. I think we've overlooked it as well, where we, for example, you see the way finance products are designed. They don't target self-built. They don't acknowledge incremental housing. Yet, if you look at, especially in the rural areas where housing, there's more home ownership than in the urban areas, how those houses have been done, they have been done incrementally. These are self-built houses, and I agree, if you don't finance them well, if you don't recognize them, then the owner is bound to just do sloppy work because they don't have the finances, they don't have the capability in terms of finances to be able to do a good house that's sustainable, that can accommodate their families. So I do agree with him on financial products. They need to be designed to accommodate incremental building or incremental housing. I also think on the issue of people being built houses and they actually sell them out or rent them out, that's a scenario common here in Kenya. There was a slum upgrading project, and the individuals in that slum were issued houses. But a month later, then no one is living in that house because they don't see the point of living in a good house and they don't have income to sustain themselves. So they'd rather go back to the slum and rent out their house and get that income. So I think there's need to look at that as well. I think what I would also add is, I think what is making supply very hard to be done in Africa, for example, there's lack of data sharing for those who are already offering that affordable housing, for example. If you're able to have platforms where people actually share data and developers are able to know it's a fruitful venture, it doesn't have to make me very high profit margins, but it can be done. So I think data sharing, as much as it's business secrets, I think if we looked at that differently and say, if you share this information, this is how a certain developer is doing, a certain individual is doing, a certain country is doing it, and then we're also able to get someone else, another developer, to learn that they can also achieve the same, and maybe we're going to be able to facilitate supply in that way. Yeah.
Let me jump in and also have a question for Mandu. And I hear what you say, sure, but like my question would be in this context that how will you manage that you empower more or less all inhabitants, all people, to build their own house or to share their own ground and their own houses, so to say. But because I think we also all agree that we think it is not a best solution that people live in shacks or slums, as you say, because they have to rent their own to have an income. So at the end, it is a social question of every country here, and how to mitigate this issue of social questions in the housing sector. This is my question for you.
Thank you for this question, and I'm gladly to answer it. The question is how we look at shacks, how we look at shack town as slums, not so-called slums, informal settlements. If we look some 100 years and a little bit more back in Europe, look at the structures, the city structures of old Europe. That are shacks. It's nothing else. And now we look at them, oh, this small streets which go, it's the same structures as in African cities, exactly the same. What did we do in Europe? We upgraded it incrementally, or we upgraded it, we put it infrastructure. There was a huge problem of infrastructure, of sewerage systems. We upgraded it. It's the same. It's not difficult. And what would be needed, because the problem is when you are in a shack, living in a shack, and you don't know if tomorrow you will be expropriated and you have to move out, you will not invest in your own house. but they do invest at least, and they do a lot of investments. So this power, economical power, is not fully developed. And by not having infrastructure in those sectors, like water, for example, water access, there are a lot of poverty structures, because the water quality is poor, people have to walk along for water and other things. So that also can, if we take that out, so if we put infrastructures in it, then you cut these poverty structures and people can invest in other things, like in capacity building. What would be needed, though, is to share knowledge, which is knowledge from the city's perspective, from experts' perspective, so that they can do infrastructures properly, for example, best practices sharing between inhabitants from different cities or different countries, what I do also in my projects. I think that's the best thing. Always putting people together with different backgrounds, you get extraordinary results. I say always, 1 and 1 is not 2, is 3. So, another thing, I think also what is needed is capacity building. And capacity building means, if we have, like in most African cities, we have universities, you learn a job to build, to know how to design a TV screen, and there's no industry for it. So instead of that, we could really invest in our youth in Africa, but it means everywhere, on what is needed, on how to increase the quality of housing builds, how to ensure security, health security of sewages, or people working with sewage, how to manage, and it's done already also, waste management, so that waste is a resource and can be a resource. And right now in the world, we are getting out of resources. So we have to use and reuse. So all those questions can be done. We just have to participate and be open to let those people participate and recognize value.
Yeah. One more question on this point, because it's quite interesting, like to listen to your concept and your way you think here. But what to do if people do not want to mix and to share? And my correct me if I'm wrong, but my impression is, and maybe Christian also can say something to that, my impression is there is such a divide in the society, in African society, a divide between rich and poor, between educated and maybe not that much educated. And how will you bring these things together? What is here what is the mean for to do so?
I think it's getting people to be conscious about how they live and how they want to live. And I think then it's quite easy. If you look at informal settlements, and they didn't say before, normally if you provide like social habitat, like social housing, you only build houses. But if you look at the informal settlement, there is houses, there are churches, there are markets, it's everything mixed. So it's actually what we talk in Europe as the ideal of a city is a mixed city. And there are not only poor people, that's just an idea we have. There are rich people, medium people, everything is mixed. So it's more ecologically, because people don't have to go far away to buy things, like to drive to the shopping mall where it's far away. So it's much more efficient. And also the transportation systems are more efficient. So the solutions are there. Now the question is, I think we have really to look at it. And I think right now in this concept on the global level, how do we want to live in future? And to see that if we share and if we exchange, we will benefit. Because, for example, and that's what I do in European urban planning, I take a lot of things out of informal settlements or African cities knowledge. Because what we have, for example, in Europe, and it's increasing, we have a lot of people having psychic problems. So the amount of people getting sick mentally is huge, and we cannot challenge it like that, because people are always more lonely, and so they have to face it alone, which you cannot. Human beings are social beings, and that's a knowledge, for example, we have in Africa. And so shared spaces, shared semi-private public places, private places. So all these differentiations, we can find them there. And if we do that here, then those things can also be solved. So the society has to be more interlinked between different people. And then it's like, for example, it's quite an easy image, a shopping mall. A shopping mall always has the big stores, but it needs the small stores also. And that's a subvention. They don't need to pay the same thing. So a city is the same model. You need everything in together so that it functions. If you segregate it, you create problems. You create problems because you have to have traffic. It's like the South African cities. That's it's very exemplary because they created their townships far away from the others, and so you create huge highways, and that's all polluting, and it's costly. The infrastructure cuts. It makes no sense. It makes no sense for both sides because we can benefit from both sides in other ways.
So my question would be, is there a need for localization, like building our local hubs, like be it one in Europe or European cities and in African cities?
The question is to?
Oh, you are still, that was directly to you, sorry. And then I will give the floor to the others.
The question was if we need to build housing hubs, or what do you mean?
No, my question is rather, does that mean localization, like more focusing on your neighborhood, on your district? Is that an approach which is?
Yes, I definitely share. I definitely share. I think it's the democratization's process of the neighborhood. A neighborhood, actually, what I see is already economic entity which can work in on many topics quite autonomously. They can already provide, and African cities are very good in that. They can already provide agricultural, urban agriculture, and other different types of the economic scale. So if we democratize that, so if that means the government of the neighborhood, if you can say like that, if they respond directly, and if people can interact directly, and if they have direct access and can also contribute, that's also what happened. For example, there are many cities which tried out the open budget, the transparent budget. They called it the open budget. And what happened there? There are, for example, cities in southern Brazil. They said, "Hey, look at the citizens were very were claiming because they voted for a left government, and they said, hey, nothing is happening." Then they opened the budget and said, "Hey, we have no budget." And then people said, "Oh no, but we don't need that. We don't need that." And they already also contributed to this budget because they were also in ownership. So finally, we had more budget. They had more budget to develop their cities and get what people really needed. So that's, I think, yes, if we can get this scale of democratization in the neighborhoods, that would change a lot.
Beatrice and Christian, what do you think about this concept?
Beatrice, would you mind if I step in? Yeah, I might lock horns with Mandu on a couple of points that you said. I agree that there's a need for people to kind of have a say how to build these neighborhoods, for sure. But I think, I mean, look at the urbanization rates. I mean, in 2010, in Africa, we were around, I think, 36% urbanization rate in Africa. Now, 10 years later, it was 47%. The only solution to counter that is if you build vertically and if you build in a very coordinated way, in my opinion. You can't have one neighborhood who builds like that kind of traditional buildings or like the way they kind of think it's right. I think at that speed and at that urgency, the only approach that you can actually choose is to have like a well-coordinated effect, which is not the case. I mean, if you look at Nairobi, if you look at Lagos, each of these mega cities has like 5 or 6 city developing agencies who are sometimes completely doing the opposite things. There is no coordination. There are not enough numbers where precisely in the city are populations growing at what rate, you know? So in my opinion, that's quite an urgent need to have a more coordinated approach, as it happened in Asia a lot. I mean, I agree. You can't just say, okay, take this living entity and live with it and do whatever you think is right. There has to be a say, but it certainly has to be an approach where people build vertically, where it's a coordinated approach, where you know where is the need, where there's proper planning that looks at the entire city and not just as a democratic approach within one neighborhood. I think that's rather happening too much, in my opinion, at this moment. So, well, that's my 5 cents to that. I hope I wasn't too straightforward here. But in general, yeah, I mean, I think we all agreed. It is an urgent matter. And yeah.
Can I answer directly? Because
yeah, sure.
I completely disagree with this point. I agree because the experience, and that's not only in Africa, I worked and exchanged also with architects and urban planners in Pakistan, and they demonstrated also there that they were able to build quicker and more densely. So density is not the high building. And also efficiently, ecologically, it's also not the high buildings, because all the spaces you need in a city, it's not necessarily in high buildings done. And that's only shifting the financing process. So high buildings you can only do if you have a lot of money, but the other buildings, they are done by the populations. And there are studies about it, I can share them, but the question is just, also the informal settlements, they go too high. So that's an economy which already exists. When I went first in the beginning of 2000, for example, in those informal settlements of Luanda, there was no 2 stories. Now there are 4 stories there. So they build it. That's possible. That's normal, because they grow it according to what is logical in the sense of an economical but sustainable economical way. So
well, I'm not talking like 8 stories, but I mean, as you said, 2 stories, 4 stories is like a very different pictures to many townships or slums that we see in Africa. I mean, that's progress in my opinion.
But they do that. If you, I invite you to go into informal settlements, maybe not in South Africa. I don't know very well the townships of South Africa, but in all the others, you will see they go quickly to 2, 3 stories, because there are people. They also need to live, and there are also people doing investments there. So that's a really natural and a sustainable economic going on. And what I just wanted to highlight this point also, because this argument also comes to Europe, and also there it's not true, because what happens, and also that's I could reflect it now also for Luanda, we have high buildings, building high buildings, and who is going into these high buildings mostly is not the people who are in need, and mostly they take then big apartments for very few people. So the infrastructure, which costs a lot, also ecologically, of energy and so on, it's not very sustainable, because we build always more for apartments with few people living in big spaces, so consuming much more energy for building and then after also for running. So that's the same also. So I see it very critically. It's not saying high buildings, they have no right to be. That's not the question. It's just, how do we want to live and democratize and provide buildings for people? So providing by themselves, I think that is the solution mostly for African cities.
Well, Mandu, sorry, just to answer to that quickly, 10 seconds. I mean, all I can say, South Africa and most slums I see in Africa, they are single story. It's very basic structures. So I think we might not be far away in terms of opinions. It is a progress to have like 2 stories, 4 stories, which obviously makes sense. If those people have title deeds, they might actually build 2 stories, 4 stories themselves, because they might have better access to financing as well, which is obviously, as we all know, a major challenge. I mean, in Europe, we're talking about interest rates of, what is it at the moment, 0.8% or something. In many African countries, it's 20+%, and you have to repay it in a couple of years. It's absolutely crazy. And even those credits you hardly get access to. So if you have more title deeds, if you have better access to financing, I think the housing situation will improve. But yeah, that needs serious political determination, in my opinion.
So I would like to ask Beatrice, but there was like there's this debate, bottom up or top down. Which one of the approaches do you think is the appropriate, or what is your opinion about?
Come up again, please, Eka.
Oh, sorry. So there is this like, what do we need? Bottom up or top down approach to solve the housing crisis? What would be your answer to that?
Do you mean bottom up, like starting from the people at the ground upwards? That's what you mean, yeah?
Yes. Yeah. We had like several arguments, like Christian just said, we need it organized. We have to have it come from an organized, from this looking of organization and being structured. And then there was Mandu's approach, as far as I would sum it up. Yes, have the people get together, organize themselves, and democratize the process.
Okay. I think first of all, to highlight, I think the main issue around is urbanization. We have so many people in our urban centers, and we are trying to see how the living or the housing for that population can be improved. I think first we need proper planning. I think proper planning then makes sure that we have even the trunk infrastructure to sustain the households that we have within a certain area. I also think there's need to make the population, to make the people move from these prominent or well-known urban centers to other places. I think that will first of all reduce the pressure on the infrastructure that we have, or the amenities that we have in one area, and we don't have them to stress much about sewer not being adequate, the sewerage system, that is, of water, electricity. I think what I can draw from the conversation now is that we can work with micro cities for Africa. This means then developers are looking to develop the outskirts of the main centers that we have. There's the issue of traffic. There's the issue of lack of enough amenities for those people. And you see why most people are crammed or are clustered in one area is because of the availability of either employment, the amenities that you're talking about, government services. How about a shift then to other areas that people are able to even live there comfortably? I think the issue would be, for example, you're looking at Nairobi as a capital city. We have so many people within Nairobi, and most of them are there because of employment, access to amenities and other facilities. But if we focused on developing micro cities away from the city, then we reduce pressure on that. It's easier to plan that city after that. It's easier to maintain or to sustain a population at a different location where we have more expansive land for development. We're able to provide these facilities or amenities sufficiently. So I think that would be a good solution. And we really need to focus on the people in the informal settlements, because the population keeps building there because that's where they can afford, but they're not having the dignified housing that you're talking about. And then these people need to be moved to better facilities, but you cannot just move the housing. It has to come with all these other amenities that are essential for households. So I think the building of micro cities away from the main city is a solution for me.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we could have a quick look and see what Wiebke got all for us and what she grasped. Maybe could you just highlight two thoughts that we quickly run through what you've got?
You're always putting impossible tasks.
Oh, wow, yes, but just pick two, maybe random, just from what is a highlight.
Yes, I'll definitely have to sort through it again later. There was so much. I think the main issue for me is seems to be that different experts have different views and come from different angles, i.e. the discussion you just named, bottom up or top down. Do we focus on democratization in those areas where people anyhow already built those structures themselves, or do we focus on structuring and coordinating resources more through governments or anything? That would be one. And the other one, I think, is clearly around housing as a human right, and the idea that this is not being upheld. It's speculated with and it's tainted at every corner. So that clearly needs to change as well. Shall I stop here?
Yeah, thank you, Wiebke. I think it's always, or I always think it's really impressive, like what you take out of a discussion, which is complex and which has a lot of ingredients, so to say, a lot of insights. Thank you very much for this. And by this, like I would say, we are more or less at the end of this week's talk. I think it was quite interesting. We have, I think we have learned about different concepts and maybe complementarian concepts. But at the end, I think I've seen some visionary thoughts, and maybe they are not that would, I think, Mundo, they are not that visionary as for example, I would estimate them. So anyway, thank you very much to all of you for joining us here in this talk. I think that was quite fruitful discussion. We are looking forward to discussing with our community in the next week another very much interesting topic. Then we have with Tundu Lissu, a Tanzanian politician of the opposition in Tanzania, and we will bring him together with a German member of parliament. So this might be, I think, also a quite of interesting talk next week, and we are really looking forward for it. Many thanks to our panelists here, and see you next week, and stay healthy.
Thank you, and bye-bye.
Thanks so much. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Thank
you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.